welcome everyone to the first Lunch and Learn of 2026. Just to start today's session, I just wanted to let everyone know that this session will be recorded. CPSU tries to make these lunch and learns as accessible as possible, which is why we do them around midday. However, we understand that people across the state service are either client-facing and therefore can't step away, shift workers, or maybe just don't work on a Thursday. So this session is recorded so that they can come back at a later time and watch when they are able to. With that being the case, if we can save questions towards the end, or there is also a Q&A function enabled. If you send messages to the Q&A, I'll answer that towards the end of the session. But with that being the case, we'll get started. Can someone give me a thumbs up just to let me know that you can see the slideshow? Cool, thank you. I've seen a couple people sending me the emojis. Let's get started for 2026. If it clicks. I'd first of all like to start off with an acknowledgement that we are meeting on the land of the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. We pay our respects to those who have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to struggle for their rights and reconciliation. Technology is not wanting to let me click. All right, so today we'll be talking about consultation and change, and we'll be going through this in a three-stage process. So first is your entitlement, our entitlement, and I'll give you a little explanation on what I mean by that in a second. I'll also address what the process of consultation actually looks like, or really what it should look like. And then we'll also end with what to do when something just doesn't seem right about a change proposal. So your entitlement, our entitlement. I've taken this reference from the Tasmanian State Service Award, but the Health and Human Services Award and the Port Arthur Award and many of the other awards that are applicable in the Tasmanian State Service, they pretty much all use the same section. It's word for word, but for reference sake, I've got the TSSA on the screen. So your entitlement, our entitlement, is that where an agency proposes change in work arrangements and practices that are likely to impact employees, the agency is to consult with the employees who may be affected by the proposed changes and the relevant unions prior to the final decision being made to implement that change. So it's your entitlement because you, as a worker in an area where changes in work arrangements and practices are being made and likely to impact, you're entitled to be consulted with. It's our entitlement as well as the union for you as an affected employee to be involved. And there's a number of ways in which we can be involved. And that can look like either supporting members in making their own individual submissions as part of the change process, or we can lodge our own feedback, especially if it is quite a large or significant change that is being proposed. Now, I should just say that this is the TSSA/HASA/ all other award consultation and change provision. There is actually another consultation and change process that is under the Tasmanian Work Health and Safety legislation that requires your employer, the PCBU, to consult with workers on changes relating to work health safety. I'm not going to be addressing that component of consultation and change today, but quite a lot of the principles about consultation and change are relevant between TSSA and that under work health safety. But obviously the work health safety one is a little bit more work health safety focused, I suppose is the best way of putting it. So from there, your entitlement really is that you have the right to be consulted with. Engaging in consultation is not meant to be a barrier to management, nor is it simply them telling you what is going to happen. You still have the right to provide feedback to them. You also have the right to be provided with relevant information as it relates to the change, and so do we, because without that relevant information, you're not going to know what you're providing feedback on. You're not going to know exactly how these proposed changes could actually affect you. So you need relevant information to make the most informed decision and informed feedback that you can. As part of that, you're also entitled to provide reasonable alternatives. What I mean by that is you can't tell the employer outright that they're making a dumb decision. But what you can do is tell them, thank you for this proposal. Might I suggest that actually this would be a more appropriate way of achieving the results that you want to achieve, providing them with the reasonable alternatives to achieve the outcome. Just as something of interest when it comes to your entitlement to consultation and change, because the requirement is that it is change that is likely to impact employees, it doesn't mean that the change has to impact employees for them to consult with you. So say, for instance, if the agency has always done something procedure-wise, but they've never actually written it down in a policy or in a procedure, and then they decide, oh no, we should have this in writing so that it's, you know, legitimate, we can send it to someone to say this is the procedure. Even though it hasn't really changed what employees have been doing, because it's just a formalization of the current procedure, that will still need to be consulted with an employee, because there is the likelihood that something could change, or that employees could provide feedback to better clarify what the normal process is. I will also just like to point out that there might be instances when there is a decision that is kind of outside of the control of the agency. So say, for instance, if you're working in a building that the agency is leasing from like a private business or something like that, and that private business has decided, I don't want to renew the lease. So they're being, you know, needing to move out, find a new building. Even when the decision to move is outside the control of the agency, they still need to consult with workers, because while you're not going to change the fact that you need to move, there should be consultation to reduce any risks associated with the process of moving, where you're moving to, or anything like that. So the technical term is, even when there is a decision fait accompli, or a decision that has already been made and it's outside the agency's hand, they still need to discuss it with you. And this is probably actually going to be most relevant with legislation, but the idea of your lease breaking is probably the most accessible. So what is the process of consultation? Really, under the award, there are 4 stages to consultation. formulation of ideas or proposals, consultation on said proposal, consideration and response, which also includes providing feedback, and then the making of the final decision and implementing it. So, formulation stage is really the idea stage. Not every change that is in the formulation stage will actually reach the next step, because with the formulation, it's a bit more of a spitball sort of moment of maybe we need to make these changes, but there's no real change to be made. With the formulation, this will generally be done by management or P&C/HR, whatever your agency wants to call themselves. But it also may involve key affected workers, and this can either be done in a formal or an informal manner. What I mean by that is that they could potentially invite some workers to a round table for a discussion, or management might have a one-on-one discussion with some of the key affected workers just to get their input in what an initial proposal might look like. And this is when they start formulating the proposal for the next stage, and they'll also identify who the group of workers are that are likely to be affected by these changes. Consultation on said proposal. Now, consultation comes from a change proposal. This is where they provide you with the information as to what is being proposed, what is likely to change, who it is likely to affect, and as much details as they can try and fit in. With this, they need to give you reasonable time to provide feedback. So say, for instance, if you get a 30-page change proposal, there's going to be major changes made to your whole unit, all that sort of stuff. It is not reasonable for them to then say, you have a week to provide us with your feedback. You're not going to be able to read that entire document and think of things to say in a week's time. So consultation should be proportional to the significance or severity of what is being proposed. They can also include, as part of the presentation of the change proposal, information sessions, and this can be with the staff affected, or it can also include unions. So, as I said earlier, both employees and unions can provide feedback. For us as the CPSU, we can provide our feedback, but we can also assist members by providing anonymised feedback. So what I mean by that is, say, in your work group, you don't particularly feel comfortable with having your name directly to the feedback that you're providing. Like, say, for instance, you think it's a really dumb idea and you just don't want them to do it, but you don't want your name attached to it. We can tell the agency it's the dumb idea. So it's anonymised and not at all linked to you. It is also worth noting, questions in this stage of consultation is encouraged. It's best to be as informed as possible to make as informed a response as you can, or as we can. You don't necessarily want to make assumptions. The whole, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. So it's best to have the best understanding that you can get. It also might be that the change proposal that they've provided isn't very clear on how you get from A to B. They might have missed a couple of steps along the way, and so that just really needs to be fleshed out for you to say, oh yeah, that makes sense, or no, that's a bad idea. Now, once the feedback has been submitted, both by unions and by individual employees, all feedback should be collated for consideration, and all the information provided should be given a fair consideration, especially when there is going to be an adverse impact on workers. Adverse impact can really vary on what that looks like for a workplace. So it could be that, going back to the example of them moving, that you're suddenly going to be moved 40 minutes away from your original location. That's an adverse impact. But it could also be that they've decided that they're abolishing positions and people are in those positions. So it will adversely impact them because they've lost their substantive position. If they're a permanent employee, then what does that mean for them? Are they going to be an identified employee, or is there going to be some other process to try and help them in finding a new position within the agency? Now, the decision maker, once they have all this feedback, may seek further clarification. And what I mean by that is, say, for instance, you say you should do this, and the decision maker doesn't quite understand exactly what that all entails. Like, it's a very simple do this, but there might be some more steps that goes along with it. So they might come back and go, just, can you give me a little bit more of an explanation so that I know exactly what wavelength you're on? The decision maker is also to provide workers with a response on alternative proposals. And if they've decided not to go with the alternative proposals, a reason as to why they're not going with them. Just because workers obviously are the ones who are doing the work day to day. They're part of the teams and use the procedures and all that sort of stuff. So they're very well aware as to where things could be fixed. And if their potential fixes aren't implemented, they should be told why, and given a reason as to why their suggested fix based upon their experience is probably not going to be getting to the outcome that the agency is really looking for, or that is the optimal outcome. All right, making a final decision and implementing it. So once there has been a final decision made, then an implementation plan should be shared with workers on the details as to how those changes are to be made. Going back to the moving example. If it is moving, then there should be clear dates as to when, you'll need to have your office packed up by, how your like office equipment and those sorts of things being moved. When do you get access to this new building? All that sort of stuff. So there should be clear articulation as to what the expectation is, and how that is to be implemented. It should also say who is doing what and when they are doing it. Again, going back to that timeline thing, but also, designating someone as being the responsible person, or if it is that you're moving, everyone, you'll be moved here, or there might be breakups of groups, because if it's a big plan, it might be easiest to try and get smaller groups to do a changeover before they get everyone, because I don't know if you've seen some of the changes with the IT processes. If you get a large group going through at once, you might crash the system. For large consultation processes, there might be a follow-up consultation process because it will be a staged or a staggered approach. But typically when there is that sort of staggered approach, it will normally be communicated earlier on that there'll be those sort of implementation consultation phases as things are being implemented, kind of going back to the fact that you'll try and break things off into smaller chunks so that they're manageable, so that you don't crash systems or anything like that. Now, what to do when something doesn't seem right? So when changes are going ahead without consultation, this may constitute a breach of the award. Going back to it, where there is a change in workplace practice or arrangements that are likely to impact employees, the agency must consult with employees and with the unions. If there are those changes being made, they need to consult. And if you suddenly get told about something, like say for instance, you're sent out, hey, here's a new policy and procedure, and you didn't get the opportunity to consult on that beforehand, that's a breach. So what to do? We encourage people to talk to your delegate and to your organiser. Your delegate is obviously aware as to what is happening within the workplace, and they can coordinate with the organiser to correspond with the agency. It might be that the agency intended for it to be a consultation and process, but they just didn't necessarily communicate it that clearly. Or it might be that, no, this was an implemented process and they just didn't want to consult for consultation's sake. And that is a line I have heard from a head of HR, so don't listen to them. Avoiding consultation for consultation's sake is not an excuse. So make contact. Where there's a failure to do so, it might result in an application to the Tasmanian Industrial Commission for a breach of award entitlements. I know for me personally, I have a number of these applications that I've been putting in with various agencies and work groups, and I've seen quite a few of one particular work group here today. I won't name names, but you know what is happening. So, with that being said, if you don't have contact with a delegate, as in you don't have a delegate in your workplace, or you're not sure exactly who your organiser is, you can also contact CPSU direct. We can assist with either helping you in the right direction or providing assistance in the consultation process if an organiser isn't already involved. We can also provide information, advice and support on a number of different industrial matters that I have listed on the screen.